Hello, this is going to be a hopefully short video on all of my build and stats and everything. Someone requested what gear I used, but I'm just going to go ahead and show everything, including a short rotation demonstration at the end of the video. I know I did a video on the rotation as a whole before, but I'm going to kind of explain it a little bit more and show the AOE rotation in addition to the single target rotation. So for starters, equipment, well, I'll just show my stats. So let me change something real quick. This is what I use for single target. And my power goes up to about 80% with Runic Aura, which I usually run with someone who runs Runic Aura. And then I pop a watermelon to push it to 90%. Combat advantage can usually proc to about 85%. I don't have the mythic companion, unfortunately, so I can't cap that. But I can get close. Crit strike can proc to about 80 or 85% usually, if I have a good amount of stacks on my Garishtra Horn. And my crit severity can proc to about 88%, I think. So that's relatively close as well. And this is all with buffs and everything. I don't use the rage overloads, or the one that gives 5% crit chance and 5% accuracy, because I don't have any of those. But in terms of gear, for starters, I use Garishtra Horn, Bone Devil Ribcage, and then Spike Defender Vambrace, which I'll show kind of an alternative to this. If you need more power for how your build is set, which I could use it for more power, but my power is capped with Watermelon and with Runic Aura, so I don't need to get that. But you can use the Lion Guard bracers instead. But the best overall option, besides the Spike Defenders that I haven't gotten them to drop yet, are the Trapper of the Twilight braces, which give just 3% encounter damage at all times, which the Spike Defender Vam braces are alright in AoE, like in dungeons and stuff, but they're not very good in trials, I've found, because it takes a while for you to actually get your damage stacks, which is what you're after. For single target, I use the Celestial Weapons but of course the next best option would be Lionheart, which I also have, which I'll get to my AoE build as well after I finish single target. But Celestials are best, I think, because you're able to actually refresh the Divine Fury every time you get the 5 stacks of Divine Charge, which is very easy to do with a Ranger, because you get 5 stacks in half a rotation, and then you just continuously do that rotation every 10 seconds or so, or 8 seconds. It didn't used to refresh the cooldown. It used to have a 30-second downtime, but now you can have it up 100% of the time after you get the initial 5 stacks. Because you can easily get 5 stacks in 30 seconds, obviously. My boots, I use the Forest Guardian Raid from Vault of Stars. And then for pants, I just use the Crit Avoidance pants, but the best option would be either the Defense pants, or the new pants that drop from the Sharandar. I can't remember where they're located at. Nope. Where are they at? Are they in the ring? Here they are. I think there's, yeah, these defense pants. You either get these or the pants that drop from the tier 3 in Avernus. For shirt, I use just the steel shirt, but another option is the ebony shirt from Master Expeditions, or the 5k power shirt from tier 3 in Avernus as well. if you need the power, that is, but I like the AP gain with the seal shirt, and that's why I just use this, and also the higher item level. I like to have more hit points, and that. And then for the artifact wet neck and waist, I use the music box set. It's definitely the best for single target for Hunter. And then for rings, I use number 1. I use the 5% power ring from Voss. Or for single target, you can potentially switch over to the other 5% power ring, and this would actually cap my crit severity if I had this ring for single target. But the best overall ring, obviously, is this one, because power is actually weighted fairly decently, so you don't actually lose damage when you drop 3% power or 3% damage rings. And then my second ring, I use the encounter power damage ring. I think it's one of the better overall rings, but another option is a ring from Cholt. Let me see if I can find it real quick. I have a few friends that use this ring. Where's it at? There it is. Offensive action. Daily is damage is increased by 3% for 5 seconds after your daily. Unfortunately, this doesn't give any combined rating, but it gives higher stats in general. But the item level is quite low. That's the reason why I don't like using that ring. Or another ring you could use besides nickel plated is the legendary version of nickel plated is the Shadow Stalker ring. That will give you 2.5% damage just overall. But once again, that's a lower item level ring, which I don't like to use old stuff like that unless it really increases your damage. In terms of enchantments, I just use all assassin enchantments in my offensive slots. I use 1 Tenebris 15, and the rest are assassins. Some people continue to use either 2 Tenebris or 1 Tenebris 15 and 1 Tenebris 14, but Tenebris 14s and 15s don't double proc with each other anymore. They fixed that recently, so just use 1 15. And then for my defense slots, you can either use tacticals, which are what I use, or you can use Azur's, I think gives defense, or you can just use Radiance. All of them are fine. Bark Shield for your defensive armor enchantment, or another option if you want to opt for more damage, which I wouldn't recommend doing this in-game trials, like Tower of the Mad Mage and Zerial's Challenge. But you can also use the Fire Burst enchantment. That'll give you a little bit more damage, which I'll show you what it does. Fire Burst, you'll deal magnitude 120 damage as fire damage when you take damage up to 5 other foes. You also generate a flame shield that increases your resistance. So it's one of the few armor enchantments that actually gives damage, which is why some people opt to use that. Weapon enchantment for single target is of course the Bilethorn. Butterfly Bilethorn is alright, but some people opt for the regular Bilethorn because it slows the enemies down, whereas this one actually speeds the enemies up. But in my opinion, it doesn't really matter either way. So just use whichever one you want. And now, going on to companion gear, I use the 1100 crit strike from Redeemed Citadel, 1100 crit severity from Citadel, and just a 1500 crit strike from Emmys, although you can use the 1100 from Citadel as well. I just haven't bought one yet. Or you can use the new 1300 companion gear from Sharandar from either the bounties or the other stuff. This crit strike or the crit severity. There's the crit severity piece, the 1300 pieces. I just haven't been able to obtain those yet. In terms of your runestones, you definitely want to use the Indomitables, all rank 15s. That'll increase your companion's damage by quite a lot. I use the combat advantage as my enhancement because I need the most combat advantage. That'll increase. It says a chance, but it's actually a pretty high uptime. It's probably 75 to 80% uptime I've found, if not higher. Companion bonuses, I use the Batiri for bosses, Phase Spider for everything, Wild Hunt, Stalldorf, and Alchemist. Or you can switch, instead of using either the Phase Spider or the Alchemist, you could use the Golden Cat, I think gives the combat advantage. You'll gain more damage gaining that combat advantage than losing the crit chance. And then for summons, you can, Cold Iron Warrior is the best, of course, but another option, cheaper options, you can either use the Air Archon or the Black Ice Prospector, which I don't have on this character, but it's, I think a medium price, or the Honey Badger is actually a decent option as well, and that's relatively cheap. I think it's around 800k. It actually does fairly decent damage for both single target and AoE. Let me put the Cold Iron back on. For mounts, I use the 3000 magnitude mount. You can either use the Golden Warhorse or the Tunnel Vision or the Giant Toad. All three of those give 3000 magnitude and they all do the same thing. For the stat power, I give myself Crit Strike, Ruthless Efficiency, and then I just use all Brutals and Dominance insignias. And then for my bonuses, I use 1 Gladiators, 2 Warlord. People have tested recently and say that 2 Warlord is better than having either 3 Warlords or 1 Warlord because it's glitched right now. So you definitely don't want to use more than 2, and you don't want to use less than 2. 1 Artificer's Persuasion, although you can switch this for like something else that gives damage, like a Combatant's Maneuver or another Assassin's Covenant if you want. I just use an Artificer's because sometimes my cooldowns are down and then we call artifacts and then, you know, my cooldowns are back up because it decreases them by 2 seconds. And then for my mount collars, I use 1 stamina gain, 1 encounter power, 1 movement speed, 1 recharge speed. You could also use, I think, AP gain instead of recharge speed. And the Rough Astral Diamond. This is pretty much just for item level. You can switch the encounter power, or you can switch the collars for, you know, mythic. That would be the best option. But I'm poor, so I don't have mythics. So now let me show you my powers. It's this was shown in the rotation video, but just for anyone who hadn't seen that. Or you can, if you want to be more supportive to your team, you can switch aspect of the Falcon for aspect of the, which one is it? Aspect of the Pack. That will give all 5 people in your party 5% combat advantage. So that's a good option if you want to be more supportive for your team. But if you're going full-blown damage, then Aspect of the Falcon is the best option. And then we have these feats. So I'm not going to explain all of what these do, but I'll go into detail about the rotation after I finish the AoE side of the build. So for AoE, I use mostly the same stuff, except the powers are obviously different. So on AoE, I actually use the Lionheart weapons because the Celestial weapons set bonus damage will actually reset after you leave combat, whereas the Lionhearts are always up unless your stamina is low. So that's definitely the best option for AoE. For shirt, I actually changed my shirt between both builds, but you know, pretty much just get the shirt that you need the stats from. For this set, the artifact neck and waist set, I use the Voss set, the Vault of Stars set, but another option you could use is the Lost Mouth set. I've tested between the two of them, back and forth using them in multiple runs, and they seem to be fairly similar. So I honestly like the Vault of Stars set better just because of the higher item level it gives you. And then I didn't mention this before, but the artifact set I use the Black Dragon set currently, but the best set to use would be the journal set, having Envenomed as the primary and 2 additional journals as your secondary artifacts, and then your third as the set bonus. I also didn't mention this earlier, but the artifact modification is aimed shot on the single target, and forte and power on the offhand. And then on AOE, I use aim shot as well, because that's the only at-will you use. And forte and power, so literally the same stuff on both loadouts. And then for my modifications, I use power, and this is just based off of your stat. Crit strike, crit severity, and crit severity again. So that's just the stats you need. And then all combat advantage on the right side. All 4 of these are combat advantage. And then for companions, I use Zuna Summon, but like I said, you could either use Air Archon or Cold Iron Warrior or Honey Badger are all fairly decent options for AoE. Zuna is definitely the best option though. She does much higher damage than any other AoE companion. It's not even close. And then for equipment, this accuracy piece actually gives me, because I don't actually need crit strike on this loadout because I gain crit strike from something else, so I switch my companion piece to this accuracy piece from the crit strike piece, which I'm not going to change the runestones, but that's essentially it. I use combat advantage once again on my enhancement. And then for companion bonuses, I use the exact same bonuses, except instead of my Batiri, I use the crit chance. That's where I gain the extra crit chance from, is from the Black Dragon Ion Stone. And then for my mounts, I use, once again, crit strike. I use the exact same mount collars, the exact same everything. Insignia bonuses, except I use the Vortex carpet mount. Another option besides the Vortex is the Whirlwind. I think I have a Whirlwind. Yeah, Arcane Maelstrom. Or you can use the Divine Intervention mount. I don't prefer these mounts because they actually push the enemies away, whereas the Vortex wraps them up and it does the same amount of damage. I know Aragon says that it does less damage, but it does the same amount of damage as all of them. The Vortex shreds through the enemies and wraps them up at the same time. So my stats are essentially the same since I'm using almost the same gear. But let me go back to my single target and I'll quickly go over the rotation. So once again, looking at my powers. Oh yeah, one thing I'll talk about are the potions that you want to hit. You want to use a Watermelon Sorbet, Wildstorm Elixir, and Superior Flask of Potency. And then for your, obviously your other potion, you want to use either Stone of Health, or I use Radiant Healing in just dungeons and stuff, which is what I was running before. But Stone of Health you want to use in harder content like Vault of Stars and other trials. And then you want to use the Bell of Empowerment. It lasts for 30 seconds and it has a 2-minute cooldown. I haven't really found the Bell of Celerity to be very good, but you could pop both of them at the same time if you want to, just for a little bit extra damage, but it's a little bit clunky to use them when you're in the middle of a rotation and in the middle of combat. That's why I only have one bell, because using two bells is a little bit too much to deal with at once. Oh yeah, and I forgot to mention, but in my AOE rotation, I used my lightning enchantment instead, and 1 Tenebris once again. But all the enchantments and everything is exactly the same. The only difference is the lightning enchantment, in terms of enchantments. But in terms of the rotation, so you start with your careful attack. That will proc a mark on the target, which will make all of your encounters and at-wills and tick damage deal an additional 15 magnitude. And it lasts for exactly 10 seconds. So you have the entire rotation to make use of that, and then you just proc it again at the beginning of the rotation. So you start with that, use artifact, switch to range, use disruptive shot, hindering shot, double tap R1, use your other two range skills, go back to melee, use gushing wounds, double tap R1, use your hindering strike and your steel breeze, back to range, and then at will about, you know, maybe 2 to 3 times, and then your other powers will be back off cooldown and you can start the rotation again. And every aim shot that I use, I double tap R1. So I refresh that rate of change. So let me go through the rotation real quick now, just to show you what it looks like in full swing. And then my stuff is back up, and then I go back through it again. Sometimes I go a little bit too fast and I have to kind of pause a little bit, and sometimes my AP doesn't completely refill by the time the next rotation starts, but if you just, you know, if you don't use a daily for one rotation out of the entire fight, or maybe 2 rotations, you know, it's not going to be a big deal. But usually I can regen my full daily by the time the next rotation starts, but that's why I like to use these greater Black Ice enchantments, because that'll make it to where my daily will completely refill and I won't have to worry about getting a new daily, but I won't have to worry about not using a daily for a rotation or 2. But the mount power, I forgot to mention. I'll show you how I use it in combat and a full rotation. So I usually don't use the mount power until about the very end of the rotation. That way all the buffs and everything are procced and ready. The T-Rexes have gone out, the black, you know, the Lantern of Revelation, all the artifacts are going together. But now I'll quickly go over the AOE rotation. So for AOE, the only stuff that I switch is I use, instead of Seeker's Vengeance, I use Crushing Roots. And then instead of Longstrider Shot, Gushing Wound, I use Cordon of Arrows and Plant Growth. So to start the rotation, I start in ranged, and then I go to melee as soon as the mobs spawn, or as soon as I get to the mobs. I use these 2 powers. I switch back to range, use this power. Back to melee, use this power. Back to range, and then I usually use my my commanding shot. I think that's Constricting Arrow. I use the Constricting Arrow usually on a larger target, but let me show you kind of how I do the rotation in an actual fight environment, because it's a little bit more involved how I described. I'll just do it fast real quick. Oh, there we go. That loaded faster than I thought. Alright, so in FBI, come up to the enemies, pop those 2 skills, and then your cooldowns are back. Since you refresh the cooldown every time you use grasping roots. And the AOE rotation is also a little bit more like seeing what's happening. It's not always going to be the same. The AOE rotation is pretty much the same every time, but the AOE rotation is not always going to be the same. So there we go, that's essentially it. And that's pretty much all I have to say on that, so thank you for watching, and I hope that helped anyone who's struggling to build. I know my stats aren't perfect, but it's the best I can do with the resources I have. And I pretty much showed kind of what you would want to have if you had more available to you. But that's it. Thank you.